In this video, we discuss George Orwell and a few of his works. George Orwell was the pen name of Eric Arthur Blair. He was born in Bengal and educated in England. He worked as an officer in the Indian Imperial Service. Later, he lived among the working class to gain first-hand knowledge of their lives, and did low-paid jobs in London and Paris, became a broadcaster in the BBC also. And when we get into the early works of George Orwell, we find that he had produced a non-fiction in 1933 entitled Down and Out in Paris and London. It was non-fiction. It's a memoir in two parts. On the theme of poverty, he underwent in the two cities. The first part describes his experience of working as a casual laborer in restaurant kitchens. And the second part describes his journey as a tramp in London. And the title is Down and Out in Paris and London. And it was produced in 1933. And he came out with his novel, Burmese Place. It was in 1934. And it was a novel that presented a portrait of the dark side of the British Raj. A corrupt Burmese magistrate named Yupo Kin intrigues against Dr. Versami, who is a friend of the protagonist, John Flory. And John Flory is the protagonist of the novel, and he is a British man working as a timber merchant in Burma in his middle 30s. And he falls in love with a lady there, and she is named Maha Mary. Maha May, not Mary, but May. And his wife is Elizabeth. And when Elizabeth leaves him for a second time, he commits suicide. And he has got a servant named Kosla. And his lover or mistress is called Mahla May. And the servant is Kosla. And the Burmese magistrate, the corrupt magistrate, is Yupo Kin. And then he came out with his novel, A Clergyman's Daughter, in 1935. And it was his second novel. And the protagonist is a young lady named Dorothy Hale. She is 28 years old. And she is the daughter of the clergyman of the place. And she falls with amnesia, forgetfulness, and then joins a group of vagrants. And on her return, she suffers as a homeless lady. Her father refuses to admit her in the home, and she works as a school teacher for some time. But she refuses the proposal of Warburton, because Warburton tried to seduce her in her earlier days. And she maintains her freedom and integrity. And the novel is titled A Clergyman's Daughter, and it was produced in 1935. And in 1936, he came out with another novel, slightly autobiographical novel, Keep the Aspidistra Flying. It is the story of a young bookseller's assistant named Gordon Comstock, whose aspirations closely resembles the aspirations of the author. And he is found writing a poem entitled London Pleasures. And he has got a lover also named Rosemary. And the Aspidistra referred to in the title is a houseplant in England. In 1937, George Orwell came out with a non-fiction, The Road to begunpierre. So a milestone in modern literary journalism. The first half of the book outlines the bleak living conditions of the working class in England before World War II. And the second half is a long essay outlining his own middle class upbringing and the development of his political conscience. And in 1938, he came out with another non-fiction entitled Homage to Catalonia. And it summarizes his experiences as a volunteer with the Republican Army during the Spanish Civil War. And the preface of this non-fiction was written by Lionel Trilling. Jojo will came out with his book, Coming Up for Air. It was fiction produced by him. The narrator of the novel is George Bowling, a man of 45 years working as an insurance clerk. As his aspirations and frustrations are the same as that of the author, and this novel is autobiographical. And he came out with his most controversial novel, Animal Farm, in 1945. And it is a satirical attack on the totalitarian form of government in Russia, headed by Joseph Stalin. George Orwell, being a democratic socialist, was against all forms of oppression. In the novel, Orwell portrays an animal farm and shows how unfolded idealism produces oppression and tyranny. Orwell wants us to be aware that a dictator, whether he is a fascist or a communist, is same. And when we get into the Russian history, we find that after the death of Lenin, communism started to function in the Soviet Union under the leadership of Stalin and Trotsky. Later on, disputes arose between the two, and Trotsky had to leave the country. The reason for the disputes were not clearly given. And when we examine the plot of Animal Farm, we come to find the story is centered in an animal farm. Old Major, an old boar, makes the other animals aware of their rights and also of their exploitation by the owner of the farm named Jones, and the exploitation by the other human beings. And in the due course, a revolution takes place, and Jones is expelled from the farm. And manure farm was converted into animal farm, and a new board was also fixed there as animal farm. And all animals were declared free. And two pigs named Snowball and Napoleon were found the wisest among the animals, and they became the rulers of the animals. In the month of October, Jones and his men made an attack on the animal farm. Snowball guided the military operations very well. There was a cart horse named Boxer, a hard-working and loyal cart horse. He showed great courage and became animal hero. Sometimes later, the animals began to notice a conflict between Snowball and Napoleon. It was Snowball who put forward the idea of the windmill because it would reduce hard labor. But Napoleon opposed the idea of the windmill. With the help of his faithful supporters, Napoleon declared Snowball a traitor, and Snowball later disappeared. Napoleon then became the sole leader, and he began to spread lies about Napoleon. He then started the work on the windmill, and this surprised the animals, but they did not question Napoleon. Schuler explained that the pigs and the dogs belonged to a superior class, and the pigs enjoyed special privileges, and animalism began to acknowledge the special privileges to some animals. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal, according to Schuler. And Boxer continued to work hard. The windmill was completed. Napoleon made compromise with Mr. Frederick, the owner of a nearby farm. One day Boxer fell ill because of exhaustion and overwork, and he was sent to a butcher. And the other petty animals were all surprised to find Boxer being sent to the butcher. But they were not daring enough to question the actions of Napoleon. The lesser animals now began to suffer starvation and cruelty. Only the pigs and the dogs were happy. One day Napoleon called a meeting of the animals and declared that he was going to establish better relations with human beings. And all animals were greatly surprised when they saw Napoleon and the pigs walking on two legs. Napoleon also possessed whips. Like Mr. Jones, Napoleon also appeared with bodyguards. The animals were now sure that Napoleon was like Mr. Jones, and they still remained slaves. When Napoleon appeared like Jones, the other animals appeared as slaves. The novel conveys some very serious messages to the society. Orwell points out quite clearly that all exploitation must stop, and equality in the economic field is an urgent need. Animal farm is an allegory on Russia under Joseph Stalin. Miss Jones is Nicholas II, and the manure farm is Russia. And Nicholas II was defeated when the Russian Revolution took place, and Miss Jones is presented as Nicholas II. And old major who organized the animals in the beginning represents Karl Marx and Lenin. And Napoleon and Snowball stand for Stalin and Trotsky. And the struggle between the two represents the ups and downs in Russia. Every incident and every character in the novel has an allegorical counterpart. The windmill represents the 5-year plans introduced in Russia by Trotsky. In the novel, Frederick stands for capitalism, the one who comes at the end to make connection with Napoleon. Frederick, he stands for capitalism. Even Boxer, the one animal who suffered a lot during the animal revolution and who worked hard for the completion of the windmill and who was sent to the butcher at the end, had his counterpart in Alexei Stakhanov, a Russian miner who always exceeded his prescribed quota of work. And this novel became a very controversial novel by George Orwell, and it was produced in the year 1945. And another very popular and controversial novel was 1984, which was produced in 1949. Animal Farm was produced in 1945, and 1984 was produced in 1949. As we know, George Orwell died in the year 1950. And in this novel, he imagines that there will be no freedom in the year 1984. The world will be under the control of 3 superpowers. This is what George Orwell imagines. And these 3 superpowers are Eurasia, Eastasia, and Oceania. Eurasia, Eastasia, and Oceania. And Oceania is more powerful than the other 2 powers. The dictator of the party in Oceania is called Big Brother, whose face is shown everywhere in posters, captioned, "Big Brother is watching you." And the protagonist of this novel, 1984, is Winston Smith. He is a 39-year-old employee at the Ministry of Truth, London in Oceania. And his job is the revision of historical documents to suit the party's interests. And the party rations food and clothing. The party monitors everyone with telescreen, microphones, and spies. And there was the thought police, who were found everywhere looking for people violating the rules of the party. And Winston becomes mesmerized by the true past when he was working in the ministry. So he found the true past and tried to get more information about the true past. And he was asked to tamper the true past. In a place where he can't be seen, he began writing a journal. Winston Smith began writing a journal, criticizing the party and its enigmatic leader, Big Brother. He writes in his diary, "Down with Big Brother." In the meantime, Winston Smith enters into an affair with a free-spirited girl named Julia. And they felt the passion for each other as an act of rebellion. And they are found meeting secretly in an attic room above a junk shop owned by a man named Mr. Charrington. It was Charrington from whom Winston bought the diary and a coral paperweight. And the lovers decided to join the Brotherhood, a secret underground organization led by Emmanuel Goldstein, a sworn enemy of the Big Brother. Winston is then approached by O'Brien, an acquaintance, and he seems to share the views of Winston Smith. He appears to Winston Smith as a friend, O'Brien. And O'Brien recruits them as members of the Brotherhood. And O'Brien tells them that he is also one of the important persons in the Brotherhood led by Emmanuel Goldstein. And he recruits Winston Smith and Julia as members to the Brotherhood and promises to send them a copy of Goldstein's book, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. Emmanuel Goldstein, who opposed Big Brother, had a book of his own. It was called The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. O'Brien, after recruiting Winston Smith and Julia, offered to send them the book written by Goldstein. But within a short time, Winston and Julia were arrested. They were betrayed by Charrington, who was also a member of the thought police. And Winston and Julia used to sit in a room above the junk shop of Mr. Charrington. And Mr. Charrington actually betrayed them. And O'Brien, who appeared to them as a representative of the organization of Emmanuel Goldstein, was actually a member of the thought police. And Winston and Julia became arrested. Winston is taken to the Ministry of Love, where he is starved. In the Ministry of Love, a person will be starved, and Winston is starved, beaten, and tortured by O'Brien. O'Brien was actually a dedicated inner party member and a supporter of the thought police. And Winston is taken to the mysterious room entitled 101. The room was called 101. And his head is pushed into a cage of hungry rats prepared to devour him. At this point, he pleads with O'Brien to kill Julia and not him. So, after being released from the jail, Winston meets Julia. When Winston's head was put into the cage of hungry rats, he betrayed Julia, telling O'Brien that it was Julia who made him come to the line of the opposite party. And he was released from the jail by betraying Julia. And when he is released from the jail, he meets Julia, and she admits that she was also tortured and that she betrayed Winston Smith for her rescue. Winston Smith betrayed Julia, and Julia betrayed Winston Smith, in fact, to get themselves released from the Ministry of Love. As Winston sits in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, towards the end of the novel, he hears people celebrating the victory of Oceania over Eurasian armies. And Winston feels himself as a part of the crowd. What could he do? He has accepted the party now and has learned to love Big Brother. And the ministries in Oceania are Ministry of Peace, supporting perpetual war; Ministry of Plenty, controlling the supply of food, clothing, etc. And Ministry of Truth controls information, news, education and the arts. And Winston is found working in this ministry, Ministry of Truth. And Ministry of Love, that identifies, arrests and converts the dissidents and makes them love the party and the Big Brother. And you may find more details from the notes. Thank you.